Good afternoon and welcome to the latest in our series of webinars. So today we're looking at the issue of presenteeism, that's to say people who are physically present at work or are too unwell or have low energy levels that are stopping them from actually making full contribution. I'm Philip Jones, I'm one of the directors and founders of Work Horizons. I'm joined by Dr Holly Whelan and my colleague Rob Ball. So Holly, if you don't already know her, is one of the founders and director of Younger Lives. She's an expert in behaviour change and science of how to help people live healthier, more fulfilling, productive lives. In this kind of specialism, she's worked with all kinds of organisations, ranging even from clinical settings through to consumer health and also workplace settings, workplace wellbeing. So I think quite a few of you know Rob, but as I say, founder of Work Horizons, he's a very experienced leadership and coaching professional. Rob, it's a real pleasure to be joining you sort of in front of the camera for a change on one of these webinars. So what I'll do, I'll take the pressure off myself and ask if you could introduce yourself for everyone here, please.
Philip is a nerd. He's a geek. He likes to play with the systems. Hi, everyone. It's great that you're here with us. Work Horizons is predicated on helping the individual, and by doing so, helping the corporate employers potentially as well. And I think this is a situation, and we'll talk about presenteeism and the causes in a few moments. But this is a subject where absolutely it's about the individual. What is driving them to attend work when probably it's inadvisable? My experience in the corporate world is that we've been really good at managing absenteeism, and that's very clear and very visible. But to a huge degree, not even addressing the issue of presenteeism and whether people are really contributing. My experience is extensive. That just means long. I've been doing it forever, about 411 years, I think, at the last count. And it's really good to have somebody like Holly with us today who's going to be able to bring different perspectives and talk about what the real impact is on an organisation of people being at work and being low energy, whatever the reason. So, Holly, Philip gave you a great introduction.
Yeah, wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. So
it was a fascinating conversation before the webinar went live. So I think it's only fair, Holly, that I mean, it's a fascinating field that you work in. Are you able to tell us a little bit more about your work and
yes,
these kind of things?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I'm Dr Holly Whelan. As introduced, I have my own behaviour change company, Younger Lives, and as we also really focus on the individual, but also the environment around an individual and how that will help people be their best. And when we say be their best, what do we mean? We mean having healthy, happy, more fulfilled and productive lives. That's what we mean by being best. And what we do specifically at Younger Lives is we create programs where we convert the science of what works into practical application that makes sense to normal people. Because to make an impact in the world, we have to know what is going to improve the situation, but we also need to engage with people so they understand why they should bother. And I think, as Philip said, we work in lots of different areas. We work in the clinical setting with the NHS, Bupa, Cleveland Clinic, but we also work very much in the consumer space and workplace health with places like Unilever, Weight Watchers, and lots of different clients. And just talking specifically about the workplace and what makes you really great and at your best. Skills and competencies are only really half the story. You also need to have personal energy to be able to perform your best. So you might be the most skilled and competent person, but if your energy levels are really low, you're not able to operate at the level that you want to. And, that's bad for not only you as an individual, but also the company. And I really think that the thing that we're going to explore today is this link between presenteeism and energy levels, because presenteeism, obviously is the HR way of describing it. But from an individual point of view, what it means is, do I have the energy to do what I need to do. So, and there's a spectrum of that. There might be someone's feeling a bit tired and it's taken them 4 hours to do something which would take 2 hours normally. Or it might be that they're so, ill or, have issues that they're coming to work, but they're not contributing at all. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion altogether.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously we're talking about presenteeism, and it is a hot topic at the moment, but that's perhaps not surprising because, as Holly was saying, if someone comes ill into work or they've got very low energy levels, it's not just about passing germs on to their colleagues. It's also about bringing a whole team down if somebody else is dragging them. And it's something which, is, well, we're asking the question, actually. I see that some of you responded. We've got a poll up on the right-hand side. You'll just need to click on the thing that says polls, and then I think it might just be there immediately. Presenteeism, is it a bigger issue now than it was before COVID? Has COVID really worn people out, left them with low energy levels? Obviously, we know what some research has shown, but it'd be really interesting to know what you'll find within your organisations or amongst your clients. I mean, it is bigger, of course, than just work, as Holly was saying. And I think it was the World Health Organization said that people who are working more than 55 hours a week, their risk of a stroke goes up by 35%. And a stroke isn't one of these minor things and with a small statistical increase. This is a really significant implication. So not having sort of the right wellness at work is enormous. The CIPD did some research about 10 years ago, and I think it was about a quarter of all people they polled said that they had seen presenteeism going on in their workplace. They did very similar research follow-up much more recently, and they found that the number of people who observed presenteeism was up to 84%, and as much as 36% of people actually said that they themselves had been in the office when they knew full well that they should have just been at home, just indulging in a bit of self-care, if indulging is the right word. So I think the point here is that if people are doing this and seeing this, let's just start, Rob. I mean, when people really should be at home, just recovering and getting ready to get back into the swing of it, why do they feel driven to get into work?
Just pick up on one point you made a moment ago about potentially infecting their colleagues if it is a virus or something like that, and that's particularly relevant at this time with the pandemic ongoing. But if depending on the nature of the job, they could be infecting the general public as well. I mean, it's a potential hothouse. Retail, I mean, we know that it caused a lot of the issues. But the infection, with an inverted commas around it, also includes the whole thing around distraction. That person who's in the corner moaning or desperate to tell everybody how ill they are or how brave they are to be coming to work really does get in the way. So it isn't just about their personal productivity. I think that they can have this ongoing negative impact. I think there are three broad headings. I mean, this is an interesting area and requires a lot more research. The three broad headings for reasons people turn up. And we've got a natural desire to simplify things, and this is not simple. I mean, there are certain groups, first off, of people who are more likely to attend work when they shouldn't. The first one's insomniacs, which I quite liked, and I'm not sure why that is, and whether it's because they're awake so they feel they ought to turn up, or the fact that they are insomniacs creates all sorts of other conditions, be they physical or mental. I think people who have higher skill or higher qualifications, those groups tend more to presenteeism. Older workers do, and the other end of the scale, people who are childless do. So there are some generic groups that tend to this more. There are personal issues. People with financial difficulties are more likely to attend, particularly, of course, if there's a poor sick pay scheme. and they just have to be there. Otherwise, they could be under a lot of threat in terms of housing and their personal circumstances. Workaholics are more likely to turn up. People who, perfectionists, those who think that they themselves are irreplaceable, they'll tend to turn up. I think perversely, the people who are just so totally committed, this is their life, their job, their purpose, all rolled into one. And they just don't want to be away from work. And in so many ways, that's great. You know, these are the people you want. These are the people who really are going to contribute to your organization. But they really need to get that balance correct. People just burn out.
Yeah, I was about to say, I really agree with that. You know, sometimes the biggest risk are the high performers, and there's a very famous book, isn't it? The Curse of the Strong. Mm-hmm. The people who believe that, you know, that they should be doing more and more and more, and what they don't look out for the signals of burnout. So they don't look after themselves. They don't, you know, they put up with things where maybe they shouldn't. And then you end up with this situation where they burn out, and they can also cause real disruption around them as that happens. So I agree with that. It's an interesting dilemma, that particular type of person as well. Yeah.
And the intentions are so good frequently, and there was, I'm aware of a CEO who years ago boasted that he took 1/2 day off in a calendar year, and it was a Sunday afternoon. And his ability to operate well has had to have been diluted significantly. But the other side of that is, of course, if the CEO is working on a Sunday afternoon, he's going to be ringing up the finance director and the sales director, and it permeates through the organization.
Yeah, and it creates a real culture, toxic culture. I've worked with companies in the city where, you know, the company shall remain nameless, but the CEO says, you're not divorced, you're not working hard enough. I mean, literally, that type of, you know, there's that type of machoism, which it's funny, but actually it really wasn't. And the UK MD brought us in to try and help, because they really had a problem with the culture and burnout because of what's happening at the top, and how they could try and sort of inoculate themselves as a team against that as well, which I think is a key part of it.
Yeah, sometimes people get divorced when they don't work long hours as well, by the way. But, you know, maybe that's just a very personal thing. But we touched on with the sick pay scheme. Then there are the corporate issues. You know, if they don't have good terms and conditions, if they've got a boss who's a micromanager, who's all over it, who thinks that the absentee statistics are the most important of all. I think if the boss is a workaholic, it can have that sort of knock-on effect and that expectation. People are ambitious, you know, need to be seen to be there, even if they're not really doing very much. And they're also probably the people who are into the 55 hours a week, because it is about being viewed as being in the office first and leaving last. New hires, and that's perhaps not surprising, new hires are prone to presenteeism, you know, particularly if they're in their probation period. They've got to be seen to be meeting the standards. And just people with poor sick records, those who could end up in a disciplinary process, and they don't want to lose their jobs. Of course they don't. Problem, of course, with any system for measuring absence is that half the team will work out how to cheat it, and you get the other end of that particular scale. So a particular city council, which shall be nameless, but here I am in Birmingham, told their staff many years ago that everybody could have up to 6 weeks absence before that they were going to be dealt with in a formal process, which of course for a lot of people signaled the fact that they've just been given an extra 6 weeks off. So the thinking needs to be a little clearer on both ends of that particular scale. But we're faced with, I mean, I just ran through a few of the reasons there, and they were very, very broad, high level sort of statements, and every individual's circumstance are different. It's a complex thing. And if you could actually measure how somebody felt, should they come in if they're up to 80% of feeling normal, or is it 60% or 90%? How would you actually define it? And some people are better at just dealing with the fact that they're not feeling very well. And I'm already falling into the trap there of going with physical wellness. Well, of course, we're not just talking about physical wellness. It's at least as much where we're talking about mental wellness at the same time. So I mentioned this whole thing around measurement, and it's easy to measure absence, but can we measure presenteeism in some way? Is that something that you'd be able to focus on, Holly?
Yeah, I think that it is a very interesting area, and I think that when we say presenteeism, I think it's a very HR word about what do we mean. So and like you said, Philip, there's quite a lot of research where people say that they believe that presenteeism has increased, but no one can really quite put their finger on what that actually means and how can you actually measure it. And so, as I said, in the work we do, we try and convert the science of what works into application. And we very much very much believe in data decision making, data-led decision making. And so, when we think about this area, we think about, as I said right at the beginning, what does presenteeism mean for an individual or for a company? And I think the intuitive way to talk about it is the energy levels within your organization. So if you're very low energy, you're unable to contribute. And so I think when you're thinking about what are the elements which actually get an employee to be high energy, if you look at the literature of what drives well-being and strong performance in a organization, there's 4 areas which are very, very linked to high energy levels. The first one, I think that everyone's talked about quite a lot, is physical health. If you're not physically well, it is very, very difficult to have high energy to be able to perform well. And there are lots of things, obviously if you are ill, that's one thing, but there are things that you can do to keep yourself, well as well. So that means, when you've got these wellness programs of making sure people do enough to eat well, sleep well, exercise, these are, they're not just wellness things, they are actually very important elements of keeping employee energy high. And that leads into the second area, which is emotional well-being. Extremely important that you can manage, you have emotional well-being. Some of those physical health things will affect that. If you think about it, if you're not sleeping very well, it's very difficult to have strong emotional well-being. And also, we all know the link between physical activity and better able to deal with stress, less depression. So emotional well-being. So can you manage your stress? Can you manage your mood? A lot of work we've done in this area is one of the biggest indicators of energy and well-being is actually your mood. If you have a positive mood, you're almost inoculated to a lot of stress around you. If you can, and it's actually one of the biggest indicators of how well someone is able to keep their energy high. If you can keep mood high, you can actually get people to deal with more. They've got more resilience. They're more able to deal with it. So you've obviously got the physical and then you've got the emotional health. And I think that everyone will say that makes sense. But a lot of the things that people forget is actually the environment that someone is in. So when you think about behavior change, or if you just think about yourself, you can think about, your physical and your mental well-being. But a lot of that is affected by the environment that you sit. So if you sit in a work culture which is toxic, it's very, very difficult to keep your energy high. So you need to think about your work environment as well. So that's a third area. And so when I say the work environment, it's things like the culture, it's the relationships that you have with your colleagues. If you have a very supportive relationship with your colleagues, that really helps with energy because you can help each other. Work control. We all know the very famous Whitehall study, which shows, heart disease with related to job control. If you don't have control over your work, you're much more likely to get ill, and obviously much long term. And then things like work-life balance. This is very important. So that whole work environment is important. And then the fourth area, which is extremely important that we need to remember, is your home environment. And especially in, the last year has made it really, really clear, hasn't it? Because suddenly work and home has become completely mixed up together in a way that it never was before. Work environment has become the home environment for many people. But, this is where you need a supportive home environment. Can you manage your responsibilities at home along with your work responsibilities? Do you have support around you? I mean, do you have financial worries? You mentioned that yourself, Rob. That can be a big issue with energy levels and presenteeism, and that's not only related to work, because obviously you've got your paycheck, but also what do you do with your money? Have you got problems? When I worked in the city, people were drinking too much, but they're also gambling too much. So there's some very sort of toxic cultural things which can happen depending in the type of workplace you live in. So I think that, in terms of, when you said what can you measure and how can you look at it, if you're really trying to understand the drivers of presenteeism and drivers of energy, I would say they're the four things. And that's a thing that we measure in what we call our Work, Life and Me program. We look at the physical health, we look at the emotional well-being, we look at the workplace environment, and we look at the home place environment. And the really important thing here is that you need to get to data-led decision making. So when I say we look at it, we don't just qualitatively look at it. We get people to fill out questionnaires. We have a campaign which says, want to improve your energy, take this questionnaire. But what that does is it helps us understand how the individual's energy is made up, but also on aggregate, how a team energy is looking. So you may find that, individuals in one team in marketing are all sort of suffering from the same sort of things. And so therefore you can then say, well, actually that marketing team could deal with, could well do with an intervention which helps with X. Whereas operations have a different set of issues. And I think this is very important for the workplace going forward. It's like, especially post-COVID, there's so many areas that you could focus on. And when I speak to a lot of companies, they talk about, it's almost like they have so much support for employees, they don't know where to start. So it's almost like, how can you find out where the issues lie? And then how can you support people with the right support for the right people? And I think that's how we look at it. And I think it's extremely helpful to firstly find out where the issues are, provide the right support to the right people based on that, and then obviously repeat after you've done interventions to see if that's improved.
That's invaluable. And I think it also takes into account that, because you've talked about culture, actually most organizations are a range of subcultures, and the difference between sales and marketing and manufacturing might be, or operations in whatever sort of sector, will be very, very different. And yet the board will have sat and thought long and hard about what their culture is and their values, and got it laminated and stuck on a wall and expected everybody to follow that. A specific point, our business partner and Harry Dunleavy and I were at a conference last year, just as COVID came over us, or the impact of it, which was about in-work poverty, the number of people who have jobs. And it wasn't just people on minimum wage either. Really, their research took it up to quite a high salary, that they were in work, but they were actually in debt up to their ears, unable to function. And of course, if you're worrying about whether the bailiffs are going to be knocking on your door, just going to a different place, the workplace, doesn't stop you from worrying. No. And that becomes the overriding concern and gets in the way. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time that this is why I think it's really interesting to measure and ask about these things, because there's a lot of times there's company policies out there which the employees don't know about, and I think that's one of the big issues. If there's some companies have payday loans, don't they? Other people have support with childcare, support for childcare vouchers, lots of things which might be able to help, which they don't even know about because they haven't, had that conversation. I talked to a very large multinational who was just saying, we all have all these amazing perks, but no one uses them. The uptake is so low. And so I think it is really about talking to employees and team leaders in a way that they can understand, the drivers of energy, and also what support is there. To actually, to help people as well, because it's in everyone's interest, isn't it, to get that better. So
it is, and I mean we partner with Westfield Health for some very specific products, which can help the organisation, or let's be specific, help the individuals within the organisation, which gives the organisation the benefit, and honestly, they're not very expensive, but it does mean cash out of the business, and many organizations are very cash focused, and understandably, I'm not being dismissive of that, but the payback is immense. If you've got 30% of your people who are operating at, let's do a simple number, 50% productivity, that means in effect 15% of the workforce aren't there.
I really agree, and I think, but I really do understand the issue about workplace, especially post-COVID, that money is tight. I understand that, but I think the thing that I think that could be improved in this thing is that people tend to implement blanket solutions, which maybe isn't the most cost-effective or the most effective way of doing it. If you could get the right solutions to the right people, that way you are being much more cost effective, but you're also delivering change to the people who actually need it. And I think that this is where this data-driven decision making is really very important, because you can actually, you can find out where the issues lie, you can decide to implement certain things in certain places. And also with digital technology now, people, by just answering a questionnaire, can get, triaged and signpost to the right things that they need, rather than saying, everyone now needs to do X, because that's may not be right. And I think that will help people have much more efficient decision making processes, and that's what we do with Work Life and Me. It's like a framework where you can go, right, okay, let's find out where the issues are and let's point people to the right areas, and I think that is better. The other thing I just wanted to talk about is the role of an individual versus a team leader. I think that's really very important, because a person, an individual has a responsibility for their own energy, of course. We can't make someone sleep more or go to bed at 10, as a company, you can't do that. So there's individual responsibility, but there's also team leader and company responsibilities. I think that, and the role that a team leader can play, a really great team leader, if he or she can talk about the concept of energy and how can we all get more energetic together, and talk about let's find out how much energy we've got, and then let's look at the team energy score, and let's sit down and go, why do you think that could be? And from a behavioral point of view, it's very, very powerful, because the individual has to do something, the team leader as an individual has to look after themselves, but there's something very, very strong about a group working together to solve an issue as well. And sometimes that can work very, very well as a team to go, oh, do you know what? We've all got a problem with X, or we're all not doing enough exercise, and we believe that if we did that, our stress management would go up. Let's all do something together. Or, we've got a problem with, workplace, we've got a problem with communications, let's do something together. And that, I think, is a very powerful intervention. So individuals are doing an intervention with themselves, the team is doing something, and then and then obviously at a corporate level, then you need to put policies in place and make sure that that's all there as well. But you can operate all these different levels to have quite a good impact, I think.
You're right about policies which are understood, because every organization has got this raft of policies and nobody ever reads them. And except for the disciplinary or grievance procedures, because they want to use them. But if you talked about a policy on health and well-being in the organization, everybody just goes, yeah, well, that's great, we've ticked a box,
right.
We've got the right intentions, but actually, what does it mean? And your point about, and we've got things and nobody takes them up. Well, is that because they don't know that they're there even? Because the fact that a circular goes round, or in a team meeting, the leader says, oh, and there are a range of new solutions to help you do your job better. And nobody then goes and researches it. It's actually got to be part of an all-embracing, well-coordinated, well-thought-through, well-communicated strategy, which is genuinely intending to help the individuals. So those people who've got financial difficulties, that was just pluck that one because I mentioned it earlier, independent advice for them. People almost like Citizens Advice Bureau, who will help them get out of the difficulties they're in. Now, if the company is there and the company would say, look, we can forward you some money, a loan, and take it back gradually, it could make all the difference in the world to that person.
Yeah.
And the loyalty that would instill, and the commitment to the company. I mean, just it could be immense. And the real cost is, I mean, it's a loan, for heaven's sake. There isn't a cost.
I really agree with it. I think that the key to any behavior change or any improvement program is making people feel it's relevant to them, that this isn't just a tick boxing exercise. We put the bowl of fruit out, so therefore we've done our health and wellness thing. That's not the way to look at it. That's why we talk about energy, because everyone wants their energy to be high. And let's be honest, whether you're an individual or you're a company, that's something that everyone wants, enough energy to enjoy life, be your best, be able to do all of those things. And you need to believe that the company is going to support you with that. And you need to, and so when you run, I really agree with you, it has to be a coordinated campaign. It needs to make sense. It needs to be backed up by leaders. Leaders need to say, look, we really want to support you for this, because it's, and the reason we're doing it is because everyone will be higher energy. That's good for you. That's good for us. And being honest about it, I think that employees actually really appreciate the honesty of that, because actually this is good for them, good for the company, good for everybody. And then, saying, and here are all, and look, we have all this stuff, but to find out what's relevant for you, let's work out what's needed. And we can do that as individuals, we can do that as a team, and we can do that company-wide. And I think that when you have that common language and that, that trust and that authenticity, that you're not just doing it because, oh, we've been told we have to do a health and well-being initiative, or we've been told we have to do this, then people are more likely to actually engage with it. There's something in it for them as well as the company, which I think is very important.
It is. I think there's a value also in having an independent who is assessing the situation. It's not very easy for many people to go to their boss and say, oh, I've got money problems. Sorry, I'm not belaboring that money one. It's just the one we were talking about. But if there's that third party,
yeah, Yeah, I really agree with that. So any type of intervention needs to be very, very much, this is completely and utterly anonymous. You will get your own recommendations based on what you need. No one will know about this. What the company gets is aggregated reporting, where they just see where there are issues at aggregate level. And that's important because the company needs to know if there are issues there, but they shouldn't be able to absolutely, as you say, know an individual has a problem. An individual might decide once that, if a team leader were to say, let's have a meeting and let's talk about this team energy report, and then an individual might decide to say, oh yes, I've got that problem as part of deciding to solve it, just like you did with a personality profile, Myers-Briggs, so well, I'm actually at XYZ. But it's up to that individual whether they share it. You can't be making them share it, or that data is too. You're right. It's much. That's not how we do it. It's very much that the individual gets their report. They get their independent solutions either from the company or elsewhere, which are offered. But the company can't know that individual data. No, absolutely not.
But it is, we're part of where we've got lots of solutions to help the organisation. But we can be that step back, so they don't have to reveal whatever the personal circumstances are, because they can be exceedingly personal, and they don't want to be shared with anybody.
No.
But at least if it's a third party, and they can trust the integrity of that relationship, then we've got a chance of being able to address it. I think it's a huge point that too many people don't want to talk about mental ill health. They don't want to talk about personal circumstances. They may well not want to talk about their medical conditions.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I worked a lot in factory settings where we've been trying to improve, with diabetes prevention, for instance. And you have to work very closely with the unions there, because obviously if people have been diagnosed with something, they could lose their jobs. So, you absolutely have to keep these things, completely anonymous and confidential. But it doesn't mean that you need to shy away from it. I think you're right. You have to make sure that, the programs that you put in place are keeping that confidentiality. And the company gets aggregated information, because they do need to know if that issue is there, and it is really prevalent with marketing or in the factory. But they mustn't know about individuals for all the reasons you've just said. Yeah. No,
absolutely. If somebody does have, and I'm not talking about illegal drugs, but prescription drug problem, they really don't want that revealed in all probability.
No, exactly. I mean, I had a very funny. I always have funny things from the city, I feel, because I remember we did one piece of work there, and they had a problem with the level of alcohol which was being drunk. And when we said, oh look, this is the level of alcohol, and they said, well, that's nothing. We drink hardly anything. And down the road, bank, they all snorting cocaine off the toilet, toilet seats. We're healthy here. So again, it's also about understanding the context of where you are, the culture, and also what would you do then? Because actually you can't just go in and finger wag. You have to help people and talk about the positive side, not just saying you're naughty, you're eating too much, or you're not managing your stress, or you've got financial worries. It's like, well, okay, what are we going to do about it? And that also depends on the company and the culture and what's in place as well. I think that's very important.
And it's the leadership and how it permeates through. And I think the way you're describing it might be that would highlight where there is, let me use the gentle phrase, a blocker in the management chain.
Yeah.
Well, that actually leads into one of the questions that we've been asked, which is, what can leaders do to confront presenteeism in the workplace if their peers are part of perpetuating it?
So they're part. Do they recognise that they're part of the problem, or because that's the issue? So very, very few people will admit that they're part of the problem, that they are a micromanager. That the micromanager just says that they need to know what's going on and they're there to support and help. Reality is They're obsessed by being in control. And it's just two descriptions of the same coin. It's that realism. And again, if we have evidence to put in front of anybody, whatever level they are in the organization, they can't just ignore it. You hope they can't just ignore it, but it's there. And there's some data which says this is an issue. These are some of the problems. And perhaps for some of the people, the way that you interact with them is accentuating the difficulties. The micromanager also has one style, and I oversimplify. Irrespective of the number of people that they have in their team and the personalities of those people and the triggers for those people, the motivation points, they have one style, and that's what they're going to apply. That requires some pretty in-depth support, education, training, coaching for those individuals who think that that's the right way to operate.
I really agree with that. And one of the things that we have in the Work Life and Me solution is we do ask about people's relationship with their boss. And what that allows you to do is if you then analyze it as a team, you can start to see if a boss has a particular issue. But what I don't want to do is make it into witch hunts against the boss, because let's be honest, the boss is also an individual, and they are being affected by their own set of circumstances and their own things. And so I think that when you're finding out this information, it could be a lack of, it is about support for that person. How can they improve their leadership style? How can they, things, be improved upon? But when we run these things, it is all about development. It's not about witch hunts. It's about development and providing the right support for the right people. And I think that's extremely important. If you can't do that, you can't be a good boss if you are overworked and you've got terrible things coming down from the top. So how can they look after themselves? But then you can then, help them, which will then in turn help their team.
That's exactly right, because the fact that the boss, whoever he or she is, isn't giving everything to the team, what we don't know are all of the factors which are impacting on them. When I describe a leader as having fundamentally three roles, the first is to lead their team. They are at the pinnacle of that team, and they're going to be doing the delegation and support and all those things. The second is they are a member of their boss's team, and that's frequently overlooked. And there's an expectation not just that they turn up for the once a week meeting, but they're supporting their peers, the other members of that team. And the third is those specific tasks or responsibilities which are discrete, only they can do them. That they're being held accountable for those. So if the CEO has given the sales director a very specific piece of work and he or she has to do it themselves, that is going to become predominant within their thinking. That's the one that's going to be very evident if they fail to achieve. And it's at that point something has to give, and typically it's the support that they either give to their peers or to their team. Mm-hmm. And we go back to, we don't want people working 55 hours a week, not just because of the prevalence of strokes, but because if you do it consistently, your effectiveness just plummets anyway. We know that's the case. So it's a little bit, what I'm really saying is we need to be a little bit broader in our thinking and recognize the subtleties of it.
Yeah, I really agree with that. So data is about unlocking insights, and that's the really important thing. And then how are you going to deal with it? It is not about knocking someone over the head with it. It is literally unlocking insights, and then saying, how can we help? That is very, very important. I mean, I remember going to a seminar with Professor Carrie Cooper, and he's just saying team leaders are shown to be the biggest blocker and issue within the workplace across the board. And he says like 30% of people are just naturally good leaders, really good.
Yep.
I think you said then then you've got around, what was left of that 60% are, just need help, need training to get better. You said 10% shouldn't be allowed near anyone, but that's as a joke. But I do think that the 60% need help. It is not about saying you're just bad. It's like, we all start and we all have our own problems, and they need support as well. So I think it is really about that. I agree.
Yeah. So statistics prove nothing. What statistics do is give us areas for investigation.
Exactly.
And you're absolutely right. That 10% we will identify pretty quickly.
Yeah, it doesn't mean they can't be a great contributor, but they shouldn't be a team leader. So yeah.
Absolutely. And too often people are promoted into leadership roles because they're the best at what they've been doing. And we lose the really good designer, sales executive, whatever we want to call them, and gain a poor leader. Well, let's find a way of actually reversing that process, and then everybody's far happier. And if they're a poor leader, they're probably reverting to micromanagement type styles. They're the ones that are getting little sleep because they're out of their depth. They're the ones that it's just compounding, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And we're here again as independents. I think we can be invaluable to that individual, but the 60% are where we need to give our focus. That's not ignoring, using Kerry Cooper's figures, not ignoring the top 30%, because they're the potential. They're good to, this is the Jim Collins good to great.
Yes.
Let's take them on to the next level, and where can they get to? And there are other people who weren't actually very good as at the design level, but would be brilliant team leaders because they're just naturally people, or that they just have an understanding of the way we can tweak and motivate. But they don't get a look in because they weren't doing the hard yards at the lower level.
Yeah, I was really interested just looking at the poll. I couldn't help myself, but it's talking about what people think is the biggest impact on energy, and they are saying it's the workplace environment, which is why it does seem to be the largest impact. Which I think is what Kerry Cooper would say. It is all about line management, and everything. It's not everything, but that is important. So do have to have it to look at that. Yeah.
I think related to that, it kind of leads to one of the questions that's been asked is how much do you think organisations can actually do about presenteeism, and how much of it is down to the individual to start changing to take better care of themselves?
Well, I would always say it's a mix. I think that I think it's not. It's very easy for an individual to just blame the organisation. It's very easy for HR just to say, oh, well, we've got issues, But I think in the end, if you're going to be authentic about this as an organisation, you have to understand that both sides have a responsibility. The organisation can't make an individual do the things which will improve their own energy levels, which means that they'll be more present. So how well they look after themselves, or do they manage their stress. They also have limited ability to support the areas in the home environment. There's some things they can do, but the organisation does need to recognise that they do play a role, which is the workplace environment, and show that there's support. And I think and this is where I think this whole wellness and productivity and presenteeism is all the same thing. I don't like how they're different. We've got wellbeing over here, and then we've got presenteeism over here, because I think it's actually all one thing. So I think if you can have not even a campaign, because that makes it sound, it doesn't make it as important as it should be. If you have a real policy that we're really about improving people's energy and productivity, and we're really doing that through improving people's well-being and the environment they work in, and make sure the leaders all have the right skills and we know how things are working, then you have the employee and the organization working together, and that's always the best. When you look at the really, really successful organizations is when you feel that they're, you know, it's a symbiotic relationship. It's, you know, the workers love the company they work for, and they give everything to it, and the company looks after them and recognizes that. And I think that comes from a very honest conversation about, and, you know, proper conversations about what's driving energy and productivity and how everyone can help everyone. So that's sounds a bit utopia, but I really think that does exist in certain companies, and it, you know, if we can get that going, it will improve productivity and presenteeism a lot.
Companies will talk about prevention of absenteeism. But you can do that crudely in two ways. The first is to do a lot of the things Holly was just talking about, you know, improving the situation, improving the offering, improving the individual's health. Or the other side of prevention is to make it such that if anybody does go absent, that they get penalised, which only aggravates the whole presenteeism issue. And so many organisations, including ones I've been involved with, have got Bradford factor, which has got a multiplying effect in there. So if somebody has a lot of individual specific absences, even of a day, it mounts up, and then they're taken off the sick pay scheme, or they're given written warnings, final written warnings, you know, through the whole process. And it's the proverbial sledgehammer. It really is there, not looking at what the causes are of absenteeism, but just suppressing it. And yes, it's preventing absenteeism, but it actually is aggravating lots of other factors, and not the ones that we really need to address and look at things in that positive way that was just being described then. You know, we can help the people, we can help their well-being, but how they feel, how they're motivated. And if they're working for an organisation with great products, great values, they're almost certainly going to be people who are going to it's a self-perpetuating virtuous cycle, and people are just for it. They want to be there, and they want to be contributing, and it's just brilliant.
Yeah. I really agree with that, and I did quite a lot of work when I in another multinational where purpose is important, but it's not the only thing. So, you know, you can be paid a lot and you can have a good purpose in what you're doing, but there also needs to be this feeling of, you know, working together, and you know, and that's different from company purpose. So you can have a great purpose-led company, but if you're not looked after or don't feel that there's this mutual respect and looking after it, it's not enough.
And of course, the bigger the organisation, the more diluted messages become. So the board may have a fantastic set of values that they've created, but then they get interpreted according to, maybe it's about the nature of the work, maybe it's about the individual bosses, but somehow it goes to, you know, the old example is the message starts off as send reinforcements, we're going to advance. And by the time it gets to the end of the trench, it's send 3 and 4 pence, we're going to a dance. It just gets completely mashed. Yeah. And what we don't want is somebody monitoring it and in some way negatively reinforcing it, but we just want everybody to understand how powerful this can be, and if we do it well, how great the future would look. So, I mean, I'm very conscious that we're 55 minutes into an hour, and I don't know if there are any other questions or whether we should be making
a couple of other questions, but I think they've kind of been covered. But maybe as there's nothing, I've just put up on the chat. If anyone's got any questions, now is your last chance to jump in with them. But the one that have been asked was that the whole working from home, you've talked about micromanagers and all of the rest, and the home and work balance and the different environments. Do you see the greater well, obviously we had a huge increase in working from home, but the trend looks to continue. Do you think that that will have an impact, making it better for people, making it harder to apply interventions in terms of health and energy? How do you see that going forward?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, just talking to a couple of clients, it depends obviously on the work, but this is an office-based company. I was talking to them this morning, and they're at 25% office capacity now. They're going to get to 50% by probably July, and they don't think that's going to change. So now it really is going to be, coming in, and what they were talking about was very interesting. They're saying the workplace, they're even changing the structure of the workplace now, that the point of the workplace is to collaborate, not to work. So they're actually removing a load of desks, and they're actually putting more collaboration space in, which I think is really interesting, actually. But I think that what it means is that there's going to be less ability to use on-the-ground workplace champions or whatever. I think this is, for me, I think digital is going to be really very important. You've got to be able to talk to people digitally, get the data you need, but then you also need real support, how leaders, because when they do get all together in those groups, can actually, train those leaders to use that time effectively. So I think it's about a real mix of digital and then leadership training, I think, to be able to unlock this properly in this new reality. That's what I would say.
And I think that the key issue will be connectivity. So beyond communications tends to be transmission in our world. We say something or we write an email and that's the end of it. With people working from home or in a hybrid situation, and I don't just mean in a vertical sense, so the boss to or from the boss, but across the teams and cross functions and whatever. We've got to find ways of being far better at that. I think that the issue around presenteeism may or may not grow, and that's by the individual. So it'll be easier for some people, so that if they're not faced with a 2-hour commute when they're feeling pretty ropey, it might well be that just working from home allows them, yes, they're there, but they haven't had the stresses and strains of everything that's gone on. They'll be able to contribute. It's going to be by the individual, and we've got to be far more sophisticated about the way we lead and the way we interact and the way we generate output. So, and sophistication is something that some of our managers are going to struggle with. And it's just life. We're going to be different, and everything's changing and changing incredibly quickly. And COVID has just put an acceleration factor into that.
I think leadership style is going to change massively. It's not going to be about micromanagement and command and control anymore. It's about supportiveness and understanding and coordination. It's very, very different skills, actually, I think, going forward, especially in the digital, world. It has to be done differently now.